4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Happy Thursday. Welcome to J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies in 15 minutes or less. I am your J.E.D.I Master, Holly Holiday, CEO of Holiday Advisors, here as I am each and every Thursday, providing you with tips and insights on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies. We are currently in the middle of a series that I'm focused on related to implementing equity plans. So much of what is happening today is companies, organizations, and institutions really digging in to see how they can transform their organizations to be spaces of equity and inclusion. There is not an organization, business, or institution in this country, and I would argue in the world, that doesn't need to understand how to recognize people where they are, not just for talent acquisition, but also to be able to relate to their customers and audience better. It is important for being able to manage coalitions and stakeholder engagement. For all the reasons, we need to be better at working together with each other. And unfortunately, because so many of our systems are steeped in all kinds of isms like racism and cultural incompetency and bias and microaggressions, we are all part of a system that is broken, which means we are less likely to come to these places organically. Therefore, it is important for us to have a plan. And so, as our series is going right now on implementing equity and inclusion plans, we started with the planning phase. And I think of these things, I shouldn't even use the word phase, because actually I think of these things in cycles. And in my work, I have identified 4 key cycles when thinking about moving an equity and inclusion program. The first cycle, what I should say cycle, and the reason I think of them as a cycle, let me back up. The reason I think of them as a cycle is because cycles have no end and beginning. They are constantly in rotation. And the reality is that in meeting institutions where they are, you may not start in the planning phase. You may actually start in an implementation phase because of where your organization sits. Or maybe you need to start by monitoring and evaluating. Or perhaps you have a program, and so where we start with you might be in sustainability and scalability. Wherever you start, it is important that over the lifetime of your program and or plan that you cover these key cycles: planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, sustainability, and scalability. So we've already completed a whole session. That was part 1 of our equity plan, implementing equity plan on planning cycle. We are now into discussing our implementation cycle. Last week, if you joined us, we had a fantastic conversation about leadership and governance. And today we're going to talk about probably one of the most popular services in the equity space. It is probably the thing that if you ask equity professionals what they are asked about the most, what they are called to do the most, they will tell you one single thing, and that is, drum roll, no, we don't need that. That is training. People ask me about training services, training options more than anything else. And let me just say, training is important. It is important to make sure that you do have some kind of training protocol. My partner, Renee Redwood, and I often think of training not because it's not a one-stop. It's never just enough to have one training. So we like to think of training as a learning journey. The reason also why that's important is because training does not just mean one modality. It is not just a classroom style training and you can check the box and say you're done. It's not just watching a video or participating in some type of online training, be it live or prepackaged. It is not just going to a retreat. It is not just self-study. In fact, it can and should be all of those things. And that's why I do like to think of it as a learning journey, because when you think about engaging your staff and ensuring that your staff comes to the table ready and prepared to implement equity plan, or at least they're part of that equity plan, it's important to make sure that they have the proper support to be able to do that. So today I'm going to just briefly go over some of the most common types of training. And I'm going to start, before I give you sort of the topics that you can explore with training, I want to start by just recognizing that just like anything else, I like to look at the training platform, and certainly for the trainings that we offer at Holiday Advisors, we think of them in terms of levels. So generally speaking, the first thing we do is we try to figure out where you are with your institution. Generally speaking, especially for new clients or clients who don't yet have equity plans, or who are just trying to figure out what equity and inclusion even would look like at their institution, we want to start with a 101 series. 100 level series. So think just like when you're in college, when you're entering into a new subject matter, you start at the 100 level. So at Holiday Advisors, in the 100 level, we look at a diversity, equity, inclusion that just provides an overview. It gives you good baseline understanding so we can start from the same place. And most importantly, it teaches you about language. Then we move on to understanding systems, understanding privilege and systematic racism. We will also look at things like bystanders. We'll look at bystander and what allyship looks like. And we will also look at something really fundamental that people don't always think about when they think about inclusion, and that's trust. And so those are kind of things we offer in our 101 program. Then we move to what I call the 200 level. And in the 200 level, what we're primarily looking at here are skill sets. So no longer are we just talking about things that you could do, or just understanding or learning, or figuring out objectives, or figuring out strategies. This skill set is like, what is a tool that I can use to be better in this work? What is something that if I did this, this would actually provide me not just with a strategy, but with a tool or skill set? And then we move into the 300 level. And at my 300 level coursework, here we are seeking to have deep understanding. This is really for folks who are seeking to not only be just generally inclusive, but are also seeking to model inclusivity and equity within their own sphere of income or span of control. And so we have several courses that really take it to that next level. And then, of course, it goes on, because the more you get into this, the more there is to learn. And so in our 400 series is our highest level so far. We're constantly developing content. And in that, we really deal with some really the topics that kind of get to the core of the why and moving and changing environments systemically. So that's kind of what we look at Holiday Advisors. But generally, let me just talk about the types of things you can be thinking about. So what are some common staff trainings that you might consider when thinking about a diversity, equity, and inclusion program? Well, you might think first about unconscious bias. This typically is something we do in our 101 level. It looks at how you can help people recognize that even though we may not have values that lead themselves into discriminatory behavior, unconsciously, because of the systems that we've grown up with, we may be co-opted into acting in a way that's contrary to our values. Unconscious bias training helps you to become more aware of that, which allows you to be more intentional. Cultural competency training looks at how you can help people understand different cultures and backgrounds. Again, think different modalities. One of the ways that I like to think about cultural competency is this is why it's important to celebrate people's heritage and culture. It gives you a fun but exciting way for you to think about the way that cultures, to understand different cultures and background, and also helps you to foster a sense of cultural sensitivity. Leadership, inclusive leadership is one of my favorites. We do this at every level above the 100 level. This really looks at the special role that leaders play in moving equity. And in this, we think about it not just from the executive leadership level, but also middle managers and supervisors who frankly play some of the most important linchpin roles in advancing equity and inclusion in the workplace. Of course, and most people do this annually, you want to look at anti-discrimination and harassment training. For many workplaces, this is going to be a mandatory thing that you do every single year, and it's tied to our legal compliance and institutional policies to make sure that people understand what is the baseline for how we should be operating with each other under the law, policies, and procedures. You could look at accessibility training, which I think is also crucial. This includes not just thinking about this from a disability standpoint of accessibility, but also think about access based on language, access based on social economic factors like tools, access based on education. So think about web access, physical accessibility, and anything else that might be a barrier to access for people being engaged in your institution. Of course, gender and LGBTQ plus inclusion training is an absolute must, especially as we think about the fact that the studies are now showing that people under 40, that for people under the age of 40, 1 in 5 identify as being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. That means as we have more under 40 people coming into our workplaces, we are more likely to have LGBTQ plus members and folks as part of our workforce. And we need to make sure that we are sensitive and respectful of gender and gender identities. And that means the range of identities. Here's probably I already said leadership was one of my favorites. I know I did that, but I have to tell you, leadership and intersectionality kind of go together for me. Intersectionality is in our 300 level coursework because so many times we look at diversity and we're thinking about one characteristic of a person. We're thinking about maybe race, or maybe we're thinking about gender, or maybe we're thinking about religion, or maybe we're thinking about their physical capabilities. But listen, the reality is that most of us are multiple identities, and we need to start figuring out and understanding how there are specific challenges that are unique to individuals based on the intersectionality of those identities, and how are we creating equitable spaces that feel inclusive, understanding that we are all an intersectionality of our identities. Then you have allyship training. Allyship training works to help people know how to show up for folks who may feel marginalized in a space. It helps to understand how to advocate for others and how to be more inclusive and equitable. Let me just tell you, I will say this is probably a favorite of many of my clients. And I will admit, because my clients tend to over-index in the advocacy space, in the nonprofit space, I call them my Change the World people. My Change the World people are looking for actively for ways that they can be more inclusive, engaging, and advocating on behalf of others to be more inclusive in all things. So I would say for my clients, this is probably one of their favorite things. And then, of course, there's diversity, inclusion, awareness training, which again, as I shared, we include this as part of our foundation training. It's in our 100 level training. I think of it as foundational and just understanding concepts, terminology, and really making the connection for institutions on why justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is important way and function of advancing the mission of an organization. And then you can look at things like microaggression trainings, inclusive language training, and then equity and social justice training. As you can see, there are a multitude of trainings that you can consider, more than we can even possibly cover with any depth in our 15 minutes, which we've already exceeded. Again, I'm getting so excited. But we hope you will come back next week and join us. Next week, we are going to be speaking. Oh, Lord. Next week, we're going to be talking about pilot testing. We're going to be looking at some of those elements that you need in order to start a program, some of the things that you need to be considerate of. Until then, I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful Thursday. Did you enjoy this segment of J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live? I'll be back next Thursday. Come on back and bring a friend.